Hello, and welcome to today's webinar about the enhanced funding map for U.S. veterans and military families. My name is Amanda Dillon, and I'm Manager of Knowledge Services at Foundation Center. Established in 1956, Foundation Center is the leading source of information about philanthropy worldwide. Through data analysis and training, we connect people who want to change the world to the resources they need to succeed. Foundation Center maintains the most comprehensive database on U.S. and global grant makers and their grants. And we also operate research, education, and training programs designed to advance knowledge of philanthropy at every level. Thousands of people visit Foundation Center's website each day and are served in its 5 library learning centers and more than 450 funding information network locations nationwide and around the world. Today, we'll be looking at the newly enhanced Veterans Funding Map to learn about how several of the data visualization features can be used to answer your questions, and I'll be moderating our conversation. So first, a few housekeeping items. You can join the audio portion of this webinar by phone, or you can listen in using your computer speakers. The option to select between the two is in the GoToMeeting menu panel under Audio. This webinar is being recorded and will be posted on Foundation Map's webinar page following this recording. All the attendees have been muted, so we encourage you to post your questions in the questions section of the menu during the conversation, and we will answer those questions at the end. And again, we will send a recording of this webinar to registrants after. So with that, I'd like to introduce our speaker today. Kelly Stormer is joining us on the webinar, and she currently serves as the Chief Information Officer at the National Association of Veteran Serving Organizations, or NAVSO for short. Kelly, can you please tell us a little bit more about NAVSO and your role there?
Sure, thanks, Amanda. At NAVSO, we are thrilled to be the site where veteran-serving nonprofits can access the Foundation Center's grant map, and are certainly grateful for your partnership. Just overall at NAVSO, for those of you that don't know, we focus on finding ways to make the veteran-serving marketplace more effective and efficient at serving veterans and military families. And so the grant map is just one of many tools available through our site and through the services we provide to make that happen. For me personally, as the Chief Information Officer, I'm responsible for enhancing our communications and technology, as well as contributing to our strategy development and execution. So for me, I'm always open to hearing from our NAVSO users as to how we can make your experience better. So please don't hesitate to reach out to me if you have any ideas or suggestions as to how we can make your job easier at serving veterans and military families. And also, we will also post, I know everyone's gonna receive a link to the audio portion of the site or to the webinar, but we'll also post it on the NAVSO site as well.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Kelly. So let's begin by just jumping in and talking about the map. Give me 1 second as I switch my screen around and just refresh the map to make sure it hasn't logged me out during our intro, which sometimes happens. Okay, wonderful. So this data mapping tool was developed in partnership with the Council on Foundations in 2014 in response to Joining Forces, a White House initiative that successfully encouraged Americans to volunteer, secure commitments from corporations to hire veterans, and remove regulatory barriers faced by service members and their families. Focusing on foundations, the tool was designed to help those working on this issue area to unlock creative funding streams and develop new partnerships to fuel innovative and effective programming, supporting U.S. active duty personnel, military families, and veterans. And I'm not sure how many folks on the webinar heard President Obama's speech last night, but it really left me feeling really inspired about how with dedication and service we can make our country a better place. And so I'm especially delighted to be giving this webinar today about how to find more support for all the men and women who serve and have served our country through the military. So with that background, let's begin our conversation with Kelly. Kelly, your constituents represent a diverse array of organizations serving veterans and military families. What are some of the most common questions you hear?
Yeah, so several of our organizations are constantly looking for ways to be more sustainable. As you know, funding is always a question for nonprofits. So one of the questions we hear most often is, what funders are most active in my area?
That's a great question, and one that I can show how the map can answer just in a few clicks. So let's say you're an organization that's located in Virginia. So I'm going to type Virginia into the location box here at the top, and a drop-down list will appear, and I'm going to select from that Virginia, United States. And as you can see, the map refreshed. And so what we see here at the top of the map are these 4 summary boxes. And so this tells us essentially about the data that we have on recipients based in Virginia. And so it looks like in our database we have more than 4,000 grants going to veterans organizations based in Virginia, totaling more than $120 million. Given from 1,444 funders to 151 recipients or organizations. So this gives us a quick snapshot of just how much funding is going to organizations in Virginia. You can click or hover on any of these bubbles to pull up more details about organizations in that particular area of whatever geography you're looking at. So if I click on this City of Richmond bubble, then we can pull up again another quick snapshot of what the funding looks like for Richmond. You can click on any of these links below here to pull up a list that would specify for the City of Richmond who the funders are, who the recipients are, and who the grants are. Or you can also click here on the left into this list view to pull up a list of all funders, recipients, and grants for the state of Virginia. So if I scroll down, this will show us a top list of foundations who are giving to recipients in Virginia. And this list is sorted by dollar value of grants. You can click on any of these headings to resort the list, and so you can see that there is the Community Foundation for the National Capital Region actually gives more grants in terms of the number of grants to recipients based in Virginia. But if we're looking at dollar value of grants, it's the Timothy Day Foundation. So this is a good way to pull up information about who are the biggest funders and the top funders. And you can also click on any of these foundation names to pull up a profile on them. And the profile will include basic contact information. So sometimes this even includes an email address, a website. It'll have the most recent year of financial data from them, which includes, their overall assets, expenditures, giving, grant amount. And then you can also find their mission statement, a background statement. Sometimes these are more or less robust. Sometimes we'll also have grant-making priorities below background. So lots of different information pull up in these profiles. And then you can also actually find a list of their grants here. And this is a really cool tool, this subjects tool, which will show you kind of where they're giving their grants according to our taxonomy, which I can get into in just a little bit. So that's a little bit about how you can answer that question, what funders are most active in my area.
Thanks, that was very helpful and pretty easy to find. So the next question that we often hear is, who is doing similar work to us, like perhaps in a different region, but like somebody that is doing the same thing that I could learn from or partner with?
So the really nice thing about Foundation Maps is that you can search both funders and grant recipients. So similar to what I showed before, you can specify your search criteria for that. So we developed a special taxonomy specifically for military and veterans issues. And so you can see we've broken it down into these two top categories. So this one's services for active military veterans, and then this one is services for families. And we developed this taxonomy in partnership with the Council on Foundations and a few other partners when we first created this map. So say that you're an organization that focuses specifically on employment services. So you could select employment services from this list, and I'm going to X out Virginia. And so now we have a list of funders supporting employment services for any organization based in the United States. But then if we click on this recipients tab, then we see a complete list of all the organizations that are receiving grants for employment services starting in 2003. And so again, this is a great place to just take a look at other organizations that you may be familiar with that are doing similar work to you, or you can find others that you may not know about. And again, you can filter any of the data by the columns here, or you could refine it by location. With all of these, you can again click on their names to pull up any kind of basic information we have on them. So their website, a list of all the grants they've received, so you can kind of see what they're getting funding for and what type of work they're engaged in. So that's one way that you can kind of browse to see what other organizations are out there that may be doing similar work as your organization.
Great, that's very useful to help find other partners or find people you can ask questions from. What about searching for grants that are specifically designated for a certain type of support? So, one of the biggest questions is always who provides general operating support or community engagement or something. So sometimes our members want to find funders who specifically give to an area. Is there a good way to do that?
Yeah, so okay, I'm going to clear all of my selections here by clicking this clear all button, and then under more filters, I'm going to click more filters here, and this is where you can really drill down on the data by things like population served. So this is where you can specify if you're an organization that focuses on economically disadvantaged, or maybe people with disabilities, or women and girls, you could specify that there. But what you're talking about would be found under support strategy. So this is where you can find general unrestricted support, community engagement. There's also support types like advocacy and public policy or research down here. So if we click into one of these, I'm going to select community engagement for the example. And then I'm going to tab over to this grants page, and you can see the details of any grants by clicking on this details icon here. And so what we see is grant from Foundation to Promote Open Society to the Leadership Conference Education Fund. And the grant description says for the creation and management of collaborative, strategic public advocacy campaigns around the VRA and the NVRA. And then under more details, this is where you kind of see what subject we tagged it with, what population we've decided this grant serves, or that we were told this is an e-grant. That means that this foundation submitted this grant to us electronically. And then the strategy. So, this is a community engagement strategy-driven grant. So that's That's how you can find some of those more specific grants or funders who give in these particular ways.
Great, thank you. As a membership organization with foundations, we often have some funders that use this tool as well. It would be helpful to see how the map can be used to assess gaps in funding. Is it able to do that?
So one of the new enhancements that we added to this map most recently is a tool that can really kind of help funders pinpoint those gaps, and it's called Area Served. So you can find it under this Showing Grants By, and so this is where if I go back to the map, you can kind of switch how the data appears on the map. So you can right now look at grants on the map by recipient. So all those bubbles represent recipients. You can also switch it to funders, and now all the bubbles represent funders. But this area served essentially allows us to see where grants are serving. So to explain this a little bit more, say you have a grant going to an organization based in Washington, D.C., but it's for work that's happening in Boston. So the constituents are maybe actually based in Boston. The grant on the map, instead of just showing up in Washington, D.C., will show up in Boston. So let me show an example of that. With Boston in mind, I'm going to specify our location to Massachusetts. So I type it in, select it from the drop-down, and so as you can see, every county, these are what you're seeing here are a division of counties in Massachusetts. Every county is a shade of green, which means that every county of Massachusetts is receiving some kind of funding for veterans or military family issues. And this coloring kind of functions like a heat map. So the darker the color, the more funding going to that county. So if you wanted to kind of see where there might be gaps or where funding might be distributed for a particular issue area, we could select from Browse All Subjects, and we could maybe select, housing and homeless services, and let the map refresh. And so now we can see how it's changed. And now we see that there's white areas on the map. Certain counties have turned white. And this means that we don't have any record of funding going to those counties. So what you could deduce is that perhaps there are gaps in funding for housing and homeless services to those areas. So this is a way that we can begin to assess how funding is distributed across any geography and really across any issue area.
Wow, that's a really cool new feature, because I know that helps to create case studies for, or not case studies, but reasons for funding to be directed into different areas, and helps as people put grants together. So thank you. I think, wasn't there another new feature that was added that allows us to see the trends in the data using charts?
Yeah, and kind of to your point about having this help folks make a case for why funding should go to a particular area. This is a great thing to take a screenshot of and include in a report or a proposal or that kind of thing. So that's definitely a way that it can use to make a case. So over here on the left, we added two new features, and so one of them is charts. And so this allows us to see both in a trend chart and a bar chart how funding for any of the subject areas has changed over time, if it's gone up, if it's gone down. So you can actually add several different issues here, several different subjects here. So I'm going to add education, employment services, health, and housing and homeless services to the tool. And so a little bit hard to see down here because basically housing and homeless services, the funding for that kind of dwarfs these other ones, but you can kind of see how they've changed over time. And I'm actually so that we can see health, employment services, and education, take away housing and homeless services, to see really kind of up and down in these various different areas how funding has changed over time. And you can also take a look at this information in a bar chart. So this is another way to, make a case for why, if you're working in one of these areas that's maybe underfunded, why you should receive more support, or why perhaps your foundation maybe focus its priority areas in a different direction or towards one of these issue areas.
That's super helpful. I know, especially as people think about adding, different pictures and making their grant requests more effective, the visualization is certainly helpful. So thank you. The last thing I wanted to ask about is related to connections and relationships. So much of our work gets done in this sector based on relationships and networking. Is there a way that you can see the entire ecosystem of veterans and military families funding?
So the second, really big new feature that we added to this map is called Constellations, and what it does is it gets at that very thing. So I'm going to clear some of this criteria. And so what you can see as it slowly loads on the page is that this visualization essentially maps relationships. And it moves, and it's really cool, and beyond being kind of fun to play with, as you can kind of drag bubbles and move them around, it provides a lot of good information. So the red bubbles on the map represent recipients or organizations that are receiving funding, and the blue bubbles on the map represent foundations. So you can see what's interesting, and I've looked at a lot of these different constellations across lots of different issue areas. It seems like in the veterans world that there are a lot of big organizations that receive funding from several funders. In some other issue areas, you'll see kind of funders being the biggest bubbles on the screen, and lots of little red bubbles around it. So it looks like the opposite is the case here. So I don't know if for those who are more familiar, with how this ecosystem, if that reflects kind of what you sense. But you can click on any of these bubbles, like I said, to kind of pull up more details about them. There's also this, using some data science, this very central to this network. It'll tell you, how close to the center of the network it is, and so that means how many other organizations are attached to it. Whereas if you see over here on the side, there's maybe some more siloed relationships kind of going on, some more one-off relationships. What you can also do if you're working, in a funder collaborative, is that you can basically add your foundation's name, or the foundations that you're working with. You can add their names here, organization type. So I'm going to add some of the big funders that I know. So let's do Walmart. Oh, and still have Massachusetts selected, so I'm going to actually get rid of Massachusetts. And so I'm going to add Walmart here. I'm going to add Bank of America. And I'm going to add, oops, like I said, it's crunching a lot of data, so sometimes it can be a little bit slow to process everything. But so I've added these three major foundations in funding. And so what you can do, if we zoom in a little bit, is you can essentially see what organizations these three foundations are funding in common. So you kind of have these four different groups. You have, Pacific Historic Parks, which both the Star Foundation and the Walmart Foundation fund. You have this group over here, which Bank of America and Star Foundation fund. have this group over here, which Walmart and Bank of America fund, and then here in the middle, there are these organizations which all three fund. And so what I've found from going out and speaking to lots of different funder groups is that oftentimes they'll be talking about supporting an issue area even more, but they won't realize even what organizations that they're already funding in common. And so visualizing it this way can really make that crystal clear for them, and have it in this really pretty kind of picture. So this is a way that we can use constellations to kind of map that ecosystem that you were talking about, Kelly.
I'm a self-described data nerd, and this is a super cool new feature that would be it's so useful, one, just to see, who's funding what where, but also to see how they're connected. And it's a great way, especially as we see the funding for veterans and military family services shrink. It's a great way to see how we might want to partner and either pitch joint grants or pitch multiple foundations funding one project to bring people together to see kind of who's already working together and what sort of projects they're funding, and how we can either make it unique or say that, we can continue to do this similar work. So that's really neat. I'm just like itching to get in there and play with it, to be honest. Thank you for sharing that. It's cool.
Absolutely. So now I think if that's all of your questions, Kelly, we can turn to the audience to see if there's any questions from the audience. Maybe Anthony, you can help me read some of those questions. And if you haven't asked anything yet, please feel free to use this time now to type in something into the question box.
Yeah, so we have 2 questions so far. The first one's from Bert. He asks, R4 Alliance is a national organization. One of the barriers we face in seeking funding is that many foundations want to see how your efforts will serve their local population. How would we use this tool, Foundation Maps, to seek those funding national efforts? So that's from Bert Gillette.
Okay, so the question is, how would we see, how do you see your efforts will serve their local population? So how will we use the tool to seek those funding national efforts? Okay, so one way, I hope this answers your question, is that essentially you can, clear your criteria here. And I'm going to switch to the list view for this question. And we can do, area served. And here, right now, we have United States selected. And so this means that grants that show up here are going specifically to the United States, so serving United States, so nationally serving. And so if we, to kind of verify that, we could click on grants. We could take a look at the details here. Oh, and this is actually, I think that this is a tough question to have the map answer specifically because of the way our data kind of works, and that data rolls up. So anything within the United States would be counted as United States area. So national serving, that's a good question that I'm going to have to talk to some of our data folks who've helped us build this map to see if there's a better way to isolate grants that are, or isolate funders who are specifically giving to groups that serve national causes versus just local causes. So let me know if that answered your question, and if not, then please type in a follow-up question.
All right, so a second one that is probably quickly answerable by you is from Lydia Towery, and she asks, is this Veterans Foundation Maps freely available online?
Okay, yes, it is freely available online. And so this can be accessed from either our website under maps.foundationcenter.org. There's going to be a link to it posted with this webinar. It's also available on NAVSO's website. Maybe Kelly could talk a little bit about more where it's located on their website.
Yeah, we have it. It's listed under one of our tools. So if you go to the navso.org homepage, you'll find it there listed under tools and grant map, along with some of the other products that we have readily available.
Great. Here's another one from Ray Weeks, and I hope you can answer this. But he's asking if you can quickly demo how to identify foundations that fund wellness programs for veterans and service members.
Let's take a look at our taxonomy here. So I'm guessing that might be under health. And so perhaps it would be, mental, emotional health care would be a category that, could mean wellness. I'm not sure how you're defining it, but that's one way. You can also take a look at human services. So perhaps under the human services general and other category. Under family, I believe we also have human services. So I think it just really depends on how you're defining wellness, but you can take a look at the different categories here and see which might kind of reflect that. You can also keyword search all of the grants. So we could type in wellness here and see if any of the grant descriptions have wellness in them. So it looks like, we have 43 grants with the word wellness in them. So if I take a look at maybe a recent grant from the California Wellness Foundation. So this one is under for project support to improve the health and wellness of California veterans and their families. And this one, I think, was just categorized services for families. So there's a couple of different ways that you could go about searching that.
Great. The questions are streaming in. So here are a couple more. How does NAVSO seek their funders as a nationally serving organization? So I think that Bert's trying to get at, how do you reach out to funders that might be interested in your organization?
Yeah, hi Bert. It's funny, when you were, I was listening to your question. I think, one of the things that's really difficult about the question you asked is, how does a national organization seek funding from some of the local places that say, I want to fund, in a specific geographic area? And it's a constant, I don't have a quick and easy answer as to how you would go about doing that. It's really, a lot of it is, that we have the tool to help get you, the grant map to help get you some of the information about foundations and that sort of thing, but a lot of it really comes down to networking and connections and doing the grit and the grind that comes with everyday funding. But we can certainly have a separate conversation about it, but I'm just not sure the grant map really helps to answer that specific question.
All right. Here's another one that's probably quickly answerable. How does one export the data? ? And that's from RM.
So right now, we don't have export functionality on this map because it's a public-facing map. If you are looking for exporting grants data from Foundation Center, we charge a fee for that. So we make this map publicly available thanks to the support of foundations who support that. But if you actually wanted an export of the raw data, we do have a data fee for that.
Thank you, Amanda. And I'm not sure how many more questions you want to take. I have several more here that we haven't answered.
Why don't we take 3 more questions?
All right. Here's another one from RM, and he's asking, how can we add our nonprofit granting organization to the portal, question mark. We have a current call for applications for science/research and would like to publicize the announcement.
I don't know if the map is the best place for adding that information, but I don't know if Kelly Navso has any forums or any place where that kind of information could be made available.
Well, one of the things, as I was thinking, Amanda, as I'm listening to this, one of the things that may be helpful to the participants is just as a reminder to talk about, you know, how often the data gets loaded and updated. And I think certainly if there's a way to continue to contribute to some of the functionality as you guys look to enhance it. So I know, you know, for example, Ray was looking for wellness programs, like, so perhaps is there a way that we might be able to influence some of the way that you guys characterize it? I know you work with the Council on Foundations, but is there an avenue in which we can provide feedback to help make this tool even more useful for us and our users?
Yeah, actually there is. And so right now, probably the best way would be if you click this contact, I think this might pull up my email, but you can email suggestions through this contact link here, which will go to email maps@foundationcenter.org. You can also, I'm going to put my contact information back up here, send an email to me as well, where, you know, I can basically put that kind of feedback into the pipeline of how we could possibly continue to enhance the map and make it more useful for its users.
Great. Have another good question here from Devin Sizer. And he asks, he's wondering who determines the subject area of grants in foundation maps. Is it the funder? Is it Foundation Center? Our organization does work that can be categorized under several different categories. So I'm trying to understand how it might be categorized here.
Yeah, so we have a few different processes for how we classify grants at Foundation Center. So the Veterans Map is a special kind of issue-based map with a special taxonomy, as I showed previously. Foundation Maps has its own taxonomy that characterizes the entire kind of philanthropic sector called the Philanthropy classification system. And so we receive grants, and the way that we get grants into our database is in two ways. We have about 1,400 foundations who submit their grants to us electronically. So, for example, the California Wellness Foundation, you saw that little report icon or grant icon. That means that they're sending their grants to us electronically, and several of them will send their grants to us with a specific designation of the subject of their code. And so whenever we get grants in that way, we'll take that subject into consideration. We also take into consideration what the grant description says. And so sometimes that can also influence how we decide to code the grant. We also, sometimes when there's not a lot of information, you know, anywhere, maybe the grant description just says general operating support, we have basically a database of, gosh, I think it's over 350,000 nonprofit organizations, maybe it's higher at this point, in which we are classifying what those organizations do. And so sometimes when there's not more information in the grant description, we'll use the classification we've given that nonprofit organization to code the grant. We also get grants from the IRS, as many of you probably know. So there are basically data files, PDFs, that we use to process to input grants into our database. And it was this really manual process in which we were processing about 250,000 grants a year. But we've started a partnership with the IRS to get a digital file, because I'm not sure how many of you kind of are on top of the open data kind of initiatives going on in the government. But last July, the government started releasing digital files of its grants data that were reported electronically. And so we've been processing those files. Because of that, and because of some new auto coding algorithms that we've put into place that were trained basically on how we used to classify our grants data manually, we're processing about 2 million grants a year. So that's probably a little more information than you were asking for, but it's a combination of lots of different ways in terms of how we classify our grants data. And what I will say is that, we realize as we've started to automate some of these processes, there are mistakes, but we are always looking for folks to help us correct any mistakes. That's the best way that the grants data is going to be the most accurately coded. So if you are on this map and you do see anything that has been coded incorrectly, we highly encourage you to let us know so we can correct it and continue to improve the quality of our data.
What a very thorough answer, Amanda. Thank you for that. And I think we have one more question here. This is from Rachel Luis, and she asks, do you have a way to provide funders the top lists of VSOs, like ones that help the most veterans, ones that are data-driven and have proven track records?
I guess that's kind of a complex question, because the way that our map works is that it really tracks transactions versus some of that more qualitative data that you're getting at in your question. So perhaps the best way to really kind of filter down and find organizations in here that match what you're looking for, or to kind of use some of these other, criteria like population served, or again subject area. But we at this point are still working on making our database more robust so that it can include things like impact. And in the cases where foundations have submitted impact data to us, we actually do provide that in the grant detail. So you'll see that when it's provided, but at this point it's not very consistently provided to us. So at this point, not quite yet, but maybe in the future. So Anthony, thank you for kind of going through all of those questions. I think we're gonna pause there, and I'd like us to finish up with a final closing comment from our speaker, Kelly.
Thanks, Amanda. We appreciate you guys taking the time to share this with certainly all of our friends and partners and members of NAVSO. I think if there are additional questions that come through, we'll take a look and make sure we try to get those the best answered. But as Amanda had all of our contact information up on the screen, please feel free to reach out to us directly if you didn't get the answer you were looking for, and we will certainly do the best we can to figure it out, work through it together. As it's always, everyone's having the funding conversations every day as nonprofits. So this is a great tool to help get us some answers, but may not be the end-all solution for everything we're looking for. But there's certainly some really cool new features that have been released, and we're certainly grateful for all the work and the data and everything that kind of goes into this, and certainly for the funders who have really brought this together to make this information available. So yeah, we're certainly, thanks so much for taking the time to share with us today.
And we'd like to thank you as well, Kelly, for joining this discussion about foundation maps for veterans and military families, which provides a wealth of information. Please visit our websites to learn more about our work. I will put the links up here, which really kind of promote robust and effective philanthropy to benefit veterans communities. And the recording will have a link to this presentation as well as slides, and we'll send around the link for the map as well. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day.